My name is Kalen, and I'm 27 years old. Most people don't know this, but I own the house where our family reunion takes place every year. A two-story lakefront place tucked at the edge of a quiet wooded property in Oregon. Nothing extravagant, just something I bought after saving for years while working remote IT jobs no one in my family ever really understood. I've never made a big deal about it. In fact, when I inherited the deed from my grandfather, the only man in the family who ever treated me with real kindness, I just kept paying the taxes, quietly fixed the roof when it needed replacing, and kept the lawn trimmed every season. Nobody ever asked questions. They just assumed Mom still owned it, and that she let me crash there while I figured life out. I let them believe it. It was easier than explaining anything to people who already decided who I was years ago. My family has always been complicated. There's a quiet pecking order, an unspoken code. My mom is the eldest of 4 siblings, and yet somehow the most overlooked. My Aunt Melinda, the second oldest, is the self-appointed matriarch. Think pearls at breakfast energy, always ready with backhanded compliments, and the kind of smile that makes you feel like you did something wrong even when you didn't speak. She married into money, had 2 kids who followed her lead like shadows, and developed a lifelong superiority complex that she never bothered hiding. Her favorite pastime was treating me like some barely tolerated stray who somehow wandered into the family photo. The fact that I was quiet, liked books, and never really chased the usual milestones, college parties, sports, high-paying flashy jobs, just made me an easier target. They joked about me often, right in front of me, and I smiled through it. Every summer for the last 3 years, our family gathered at the lake house, my house, for a weekend reunion. I did all the prep work, booked the catering, raked the leaves off the dock, checked the plumbing, made sure the lights worked and the heat wasn't stuck on again. I bought extra towels. I even stocked the fridge with all their little preferences: almond milk for my cousin Jess, gluten-free snacks for Aunt Rachel, sugar-free lemonade for Uncle Mike. Nobody ever said thank you. Not once. In fact, every year it felt more like they were doing me a favor just by showing up. This year, something felt different before it even started. My mom called a week ahead to say, "Remember, we're still good for the reunion, right?" I told Melinda you'd have the house ready. Not asked. Told. Like always. And then she added, she said she'll bring extra chairs because she invited a few people this time. A few turned out to be 15. People I hadn't seen in years, second cousins, neighbors from her street, and apparently even some new in-laws I'd never met. I didn't argue. I just made a note to clean out the garage and borrow some folding tables. By Friday morning, they began pouring in. I watched from the upstairs window as SUVs unloaded bags, coolers, and strollers. Laughter floated up before the front door even opened. No one knocked. They never did. Jess was the first inside. "Kalen," she called, "be a gem and help us with the cooler." Her voice had the same casual command it always did. I went down. I smiled. I carried the cooler. The first night was the usual awkward blend of loud chatter, inside jokes I was never part of, and clinking glasses while I hovered in the kitchen, refilling trays and wiping up crumbs like I was the help. No one offered to pitch in. When the water heater hiccuped, I quietly fixed it. When the youngest cousin got gum stuck under the dining room chair, I scrubbed it clean. I said nothing. I just kept moving. My mom gave me a weak smile once when we crossed paths, but she didn't say much either. By Saturday, the dynamic shifted. Aunt Melinda was in rare form, sitting on the patio like she was surveying a kingdom. "You should really do something about the bushes," she said as I passed. "They're looking wild. And that dock still leans. Has for years. Thought someone would have fixed it by now." I nodded. Said I'd look into it. Then she added, "This house used to have charm. Shame no one takes care of it anymore." That was the first time I felt something snap, just a little. But I swallowed it down. It wasn't the first time I'd been insulted in my own home. That night, I made the mistake of sitting down at the big table on the deck. The one with the nicer chairs, the string lights, the centerpiece Jess had brought. Everyone else was there, plates full, wine glasses raised. I'd barely said a word when my cousin Tyler looked over and said, "So, Kalen, you still doing that computer thing?" I told him yes. I worked remote cybersecurity. He blinked. "Wow, guess that's a real job now, huh?" Everyone laughed, including my mom. I excused myself after that. Sat by the dock for a while. Let the silence wash over me. The truth is, I wasn't mad about the comment. I was tired. Tired of pretending this dynamic was okay. Tired of being treated like a guest, or worse, a burden, in a space I owned. Tired of buying food for people who mocked me with the mouths I fed. And still, I didn't say anything. Not yet. Sunday was the final meal. A big brunch, pancakes, fruit platters, bacon, the works. I was in the kitchen most of the morning making it all. Around noon, the sky turned gray. Rain started tapping on the windows. The living room filled with noise again. Conversations overlapping, cousins arguing about board games, Aunt Rachel loudly debating the merits of almond flour. I stood back and just watched them. My family. At least, the people who shared my blood. We all sat down eventually. The table stretched across the room, mismatched chairs crammed together. I was squeezed at the far end. My plate had gone cold before I even took a bite. That's when Aunt Melinda, eyes narrowed like she'd been waiting for a moment to strike, leaned forward, looked directly at me across the plates and forks, and said with a tight little smirk, "You don't even count. You're just the kid they should have left behind." The words hit like glass cracking in slow motion. My cousin snorted. Jess laughed under her breath. My mom didn't even flinch. And I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, hand shaking just slightly, rain tapping harder on the windows now. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood, pushed my chair back slowly, cleared my throat, and said, "This isn't your reunion. This is my property. Get out." The words came out low and calm. Not angry, not loud, just final. At first, no one moved. It was as if they didn't register what I said. A few forks paused midair. My cousin Jess blinked. Aunt Melinda tilted her head like I'd spoken in another language. My mom furrowed her brow, a confused little crease forming between her eyebrows. Then I stepped back from the table and repeated it, clearer this time. "You heard me. Get out. All of you." The silence that followed was the kind that only comes when something unthinkable has just been spoken aloud. And I stood there, unmoving, while the first drops of cold rain began to pound against the roof. Chairs scraped. Slowly, like the sound itself wasn't sure if it had permission to exist yet. Aunt Melinda's smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but I caught it. She leaned forward, hands clasped together like a courtroom prosecutor. "Excuse me," she said. "You're being dramatic. Sit down. Let's not embarrass yourself." I didn't budge. I walked around the edge of the table, quiet, controlled, all the way to the sliding glass doors that led to the patio. I opened them wide, just enough for the cold, misty air and steady downpour to flood the room with the smell of pine and wet earth. It was already coming down hard, sideways at times, blowing in against the threshold. A storm front had rolled in quicker than expected. Thunder cracked in the distance like punctuation. I turned back toward them. "This isn't a request. This house is mine. I have the deed. It's under my name. Not Mom's. Not Grandpa's. Mine. You've spent the weekend insulting me, laughing at me, using me. You ate food I bought, stayed in rooms I cleaned, complained about bushes I trimmed. And then today, you called me a mistake to my face, and not a single one of you said a word." Someone let out a little gasp. My mom's hand twitched toward her water glass. But still, she said nothing. "I don't care that it's raining. I don't care that your plates are still full. Get out." Tyler stood first. He laughed, the kind of awkward, shaky laugh people use when they think you must be joking. "Kalen, come on. You're not seriously." I cut him off. "Do you want me to call the sheriff and have them remind you how trespassing works? I've got the paperwork upstairs." He didn't laugh again. Jess muttered, "You're being insane," but she stood anyway and grabbed her tote bag from the corner. Aunt Rachel looked stunned, blinking like someone had thrown cold water in her face. "You're kicking us out? In the rain? Like animals? You treated me like less than that for years," I said. "I figure I'm being generous." Melinda stood last. She moved slowly, like she still believed she could regain control if she just held her head high enough. "This is family," she said. "You don't do this to family." I stared at her hollow. Family doesn't do this to one of their own for decades and expect them to keep setting the table. She walked toward the door, heels clicking on the hardwood like gunshots, pausing beside me long enough to whisper, "You'll regret this." I didn't look at her, not even for a second. They spilled out onto the patio, some carrying their food in paper napkins, others in disbelief, murmuring and grumbling as the rain drenched their hair and soaked their carefully ironed linen shirts. Someone slipped on the wet steps. Someone else cursed under their breath. I watched them fumble with umbrellas, try to cover their kids, try to keep their luggage dry as they ran for their cars. Thunder cracked again, closer this time. The whole scene felt like something out of a dream I'd had 1,000 times. The one where I finally stood up for myself, where I finally stopped letting silence be my shield. And now here it was, real, loud, wet, messy, and perfect. I closed the sliding glass door slowly, locked it, turned around, and that's when I saw her. My mom, still standing by the table, still holding her glass, not moving, just staring at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "Kalen, what have you done?" she said quietly. I met her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to shrink beneath her disappointment. I didn't feel like I owed her an explanation, but I gave her one anyway. Just one line. "I did what you never had the spine to do." She didn't speak again, just set her glass down on the table and walked slowly toward the door, pausing at the threshold, rain misting her hair already. She didn't look back, just stepped outside into the storm and pulled the door closed behind her. I stood alone in the dining room, the lights still on, plates still warm, the smell of bacon and syrup still hanging in the air, mixing with the wet forest breeze that clung to the doorway. And I felt, not proud, not angry, not vindicated, just done. And then I remembered the folder, the one I kept upstairs, the one that had all the scanned documents, the property deed, the tax receipts, even the notarized letter from my grandfather. I'd kept it out of sight for years, but not anymore. I went upstairs to get it, because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The folder was exactly where I left it, top drawer of the desk in my room, underneath a stack of utility bills and an old photo of me and Grandpa fishing by the dock. I paused when I saw that photo. He had one arm around my shoulder, the other lifting a tiny perch from the line with exaggerated pride. I must have been 9. I remembered that day so clearly. The water had been choppy, my hands too cold to hold the pole steady, but he'd sat beside me for hours anyway, saying, "Patience, Kalen. The good things always take time." He'd been the only one who ever saw me, truly saw me. And when he passed, quietly, without ceremony, the rest of the family swooped in like buzzards. My mother cried, sure, but only after asking the lawyer what was left in the estate. Aunt Melinda had hosted a celebration of life that felt more like a wine tasting. No one read his letters. No one visited the dock. No one knew he left the house to me because he wanted me to have something of my own, something to protect. That's why I'd kept the deed quiet. Not to play games, not to hold it over anyone's head, but because it was mine and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Until now. I took the folder downstairs. The dining room was empty, chairs still scattered, napkins balled up on the plates like small, crumpled white flags. I set the folder right in the center of the table. No ceremony, no announcement, just there, visible, in the open. Let them wonder, let them ask, let them realize, finally, that the foundation of their entitlement had been built on a house they didn't even own. I moved through the house slowly, checking rooms. Some left behind jackets, books, a half-charged phone on the kitchen counter. I didn't care. They could come back for their things, but they wouldn't be stepping foot inside. Not again. Outside, I could still see the cluster of cars at the edge of the gravel path. Headlights glowed faint through the mist and rain. Some people had started to drive off already. Others stood in groups, looking dazed, like they couldn't quite process what had happened. And then I saw him. Uncle Ryan, my mother's youngest brother. Always quiet, always a little outside the drama. He'd brought his wife, Janice, and their daughter, Amelia. I didn't see them much, but they were always polite. Not warm, not cold, just distant, like everyone else. But now he was walking back toward the porch, soaked through but holding something under his coat. I opened the door slightly, but didn't speak. He hesitated, then held up a small Tupperware. "Janice made extra cobbler. She figured you wouldn't get any." I raised an eyebrow. "She also said," he continued, glancing over his shoulder, "that Melinda's a raging cow and you did what half of us have wanted to do for years." That caught me off guard. I took the container. "Thanks." He paused. "You okay?" "I will be." He nodded, then looked past me at the house. "You really own it?" "Yeah." "Good," he said simply, with no hesitation. "Good." Then he turned and walked back toward the cars, head low against the wind. The front yard was clearing now. Melinda's Lexus was already gone. My mom stood beside her car, talking to Tyler, both of them making big hand gestures, frantic, confused, like this wasn't how things were supposed to go. For the first time, I watched them from the safety of inside, without flinching, without feeling like the one left out. I didn't care what they said now. I closed the door again, locked it, and then I turned off the dining room lights and sat on the floor, back to the wall, folders still on the table like a monument to the silence I'd finally shattered. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. "We need to talk." 3 dots appeared below it, then disappeared, then appeared again. I stared at the screen. Another message came in. "You embarrassed me. In front of everyone." I didn't reply. Another ping. "I don't know who you think you are." And then, "If Grandpa saw this, he'd be ashamed of you." That was it. That was her final card. Her ace. Shame. The one she'd used since I was a kid. Whenever I disappointed her, whenever I said something inconvenient, whenever I existed in a way that didn't fit her script, she'd dangle Grandpa's name like a weapon. Like I wasn't allowed to claim his love if I didn't fall in line. But now I just turned the phone over. Because I knew the truth. And the proof was still sitting on the table. I left the phone face down on the table and didn't pick it up again that night. Her texts kept coming. Some angry, some pleading, some trying to rewrite history in real time. We were just teasing. "You've always been too sensitive. This is what happens when you isolate yourself." But the truth was, I didn't feel isolated for the first time in years. I felt clear. The rain didn't let up. By nightfall, the gravel driveway had turned into a shallow stream. I turned on the fireplace and sat with a blanket on the couch, listening to the crackle of logs and the soft hum of the storm outside. The house was quiet again. Not heavy quiet. Peaceful quiet. The kind you notice when you're not waiting for someone to insult you in your own kitchen. The next morning, the world looked freshly scrubbed. The lake steamed with early mist, and the sunlight pushed through the pine trees like soft fingers. I made myself coffee. Real breakfast, just for me. No platters. No reheating 6 different dietary preferences. Just toast and eggs, eaten in silence with a side of deep breath. Around noon, I got a knock at the door. It was my cousin Amelia, Uncle Ryan's daughter. Early 20s, pink hoodie, damp sneakers. She was alone, holding a paper bag. "Dad said you might need this back," she said, handing over a paperback novel I'd lent Ryan 2 years ago and forgotten about. She hesitated. "Can I sit for a second?" I let her in. She toed off her muddy shoes, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared at the fireplace. Then she spoke, voice low, almost embarrassed. "I didn't know it was your house. I mean, we all kind of assumed you were just, like, staying here. Because you didn't have your own place or something." "That's what everyone thinks," I said. "Because no one ever asked." She nodded. "Well, I think it was badass. What you did." I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. "Tyler's been ranting on Instagram all morning about being evicted mid-brunch. Said you humiliated the family and that we need to boycott your house." She made air quotes with a smirk. "Like it's a restaurant or something." I laughed for the first time in days. A real laugh. "Good," I said. "Let them boycott." She hesitated again. "You know, I think a lot of us just followed the vibe. Like Melinda sets the tone, and no one wants to be the weird one who pushes back." "You mean no one wants to be me?" She looked down. "Yeah." We sat in silence for a while. Then she added, "But I think you're better off without them." I nodded. "I know." After she left, I started packing. Not because I was leaving, but because they weren't coming back. That Monday, I called the lawyer. I asked about putting a gate up by the road. I asked how to legally enforce trespassing laws on private property, even with family. I had the documents faxed, then notarized. Then I made a decision I'd been circling for a long time. I wrote a letter. To my mother. "I won't be responding to your messages anymore. Not because I'm angry, though I have every right to be, but because I'm finally choosing peace. You've made it clear for years that love in this family is conditional, based on performance, silence, obedience, or the illusion of fitting in. I won't keep paying to be the family punching bag. I own the house. It was given to me by Grandpa, and I will honor that by no longer allowing it to be a stage for mockery and manipulation. You always told me I was too sensitive. Maybe I was. But being sensitive is what made me realize I don't deserve to be used, ignored, or laughed at in my own home. You taught me that love means enduring humiliation. Grandpa taught me that love means protection and dignity and showing up even when no one else does. I'm choosing his version. Don't contact me again unless it's with an apology. A real one. Not for the reunion. Not for the weather. Not for the misunderstanding. An apology for decades of quiet dismissal. For the look in your eyes when you let them treat me like nothing. For never standing up, even once, when I needed you most. Until then, I wish you peace. But from a distance. Kalen. I printed it, sealed it in an envelope, drove to town, and dropped it at the post office. 2 days later, I got a call. It was from the florist. Apparently, someone had ordered a bouquet to be delivered to my address. White lilies. No card. I told them to keep it. A week after that, I got an email from Aunt Rachel. Long-winded. Rambling. A bit desperate. She said she hadn't realized how bad things had been. That she always loved me. Even if she didn't show it. That families have rough patches. I didn't reply. Instead, I called a few friends. Real ones. People I hadn't seen in person since before the pandemic. We planned a weekend. Just us, quiet. Games and grilling and no expectations. And that weekend, they knocked before entering. They brought their own snacks. They said thank you after every meal. And we laughed. For real. Not that thin, strained chuckle I used to force at the reunion table. I wasn't the joke anymore. I wasn't the outsider. I was just Kalen in my own space, surrounded by people who actually saw me. By fall, the leaves had changed. I landscaped the yard, painted the porch rails, put up a small sign at the front gate. Private property, access by invitation only. Somewhere in a group chat I was probably still removed from, I imagined the outrage. The drama. The half-truths. Let them spin whatever story they wanted. Because the truth didn't belong to them anymore. It was mine. The house stayed quiet that winter. Peaceful. Clean. Whole. And every time I passed the framed photo of me and Grandpa by the dock, I remembered his words. The good things always take time. And he was right. Because for the first time in my life, I was home.